2.1 seconds. That's all that's left. The spectrum in Philadelphia is shaking. Kentucky leads 103-102 in overtime of the East Regional Final. Sean Woods, one of Kentucky's unforgettables, just banked in a floater over Christian Laettner's outstretched hand. The Kentucky bench erupts. CBS's play-by-play man, Vern Lundquist, is composing an on-air ode to Rick Pitino. Duke calls a timeout, and in the huddle, with the back-to-back dream slipping away, Coach K says 5 words: "We're going to win the damn game." The ball hits nothing but the bottom of the net. Duke 104, Kentucky 103. Christian Laettner, 10 for 10 from the field, 10 for 10 from the line. A perfect game to keep a perfect dream
Bobby Hurley
alive.
up the floor with Laettner. They throw it the length of the floor. Laettner catches, comes down, dribbles, shoots, scores! Christian Laettner has hit the bucket at the buzzer. The Blue Devils win it, 104.
Welcome back to Iconic Seasons, the podcast where we tell stories of college basketball teams and moments that changed everything. I'm your host, Aaron Meyer, and today we're picking up right where we left off. Last episode, we told you the story of Banner 1, how Duke went from a 30-point humiliation to cutting down the nets in Indianapolis. Oh yeah, there was that little upset of Duke in the tournament in between. There's just something about Duke losing, but also something about them winning. And this is the story of what came next after that first banner. The story of a team that went from that beloved underdog beating UNLV to the most hated program in college basketball history. A team that lost its point guard to a broken foot, survived the greatest game ever played, and somehow won it all again, back-to-back. This is Banner 2, the 1991-92 Duke Blue Devils. It starts with a question that nobody had an answer for. The day after winning the national championship in Indianapolis, Duke returned to Cameron Indoor Stadium. The place was packed. Students still bleary-eyed from celebration, and Coach K, looking out over the overjoyed crowd, said something that everyone in the building understood. Where should we put it, as he held up the national championship trophy? Cameron was already filled with banners, 8 Final Fours, 9 ACC tournament titles, a number 1 ranking in 1986. But not a single one of those banners said national championship. Now one would. Banner 1 went up, and it changes everything, not just for the program, but for how the world saw Duke basketball. See, before 1991, Duke was a little team that almost could. The program that made Final Fours but couldn't win the big one. The media at that time loved them. Well, maybe still do. Their players were smart, funny, sometimes self-deprecating. When Jay Billis was asked at the 1986 Final Four if he'd like to play in the NBA, he said, "I'd give my right arm to play in the NBA, but I don't think there's a lot of call for one-arm basketball players in that league." People ate that up. But there's one thing about America: we love an underdog. We root for the team that's trying to break through, and the moment they actually break through, the moment they're the front runner, that's when things change.
Bill Murray is somehow involved. It just kind of kept going and going and was awesome for all these different reasons. But the fundamental thing people seem to love was that something bad happened to Duke. And I really do think they might be the most hated anything that we have in sports right
Think
now.
about all throughout history. Whether it's Giannis, people flip on him, Luka, everyone. Eventually, when Wemby wins world championship, or any team that wins a world championship, they go from underdog to blue blood to hated. Oklahoma City Thunder may be on the precipice of that, especially if they win it again this year. For Duke, the change was dramatic. Suddenly, the same characteristics that people were talking about as charming, the articulate players, the Cameron Crazies, Coach K, they turned into targets. The label that would follow Duke to this day had already started to form in 1986. One nationally known writer looked at Duke's press conference and called them the Cosby Kids. Another insisted that referees had handed Duke their wins. 2 phrases were born the day after Duke won the national championship that would dog them for decades: white America's team and the team that gets all the calls. Coach K has always pushed back on both. He said, We had at least as many great black players as white players, dating back to Johnny Dawkins and Tommy Amaker. Am I going to apologize because our players, black and white, were smart and articulate and funny? No. As for the officials, do the calls go our way on occasion? Yes. Did we get calls going against us? Also, yes. We won because we were better, not because of the referees. Now, coming into the 1991-92 season, Duke was ranked number 1 in the country. All 4 of their best players, Laettner, Hurley, Grant Hill, and Thomas Hill, were back. Brian Davis was returning as a super sub. The only starter that had graduated was Greg Kubek, and his minutes would go to sophomores Antonio Lang and Marty Clark. Coach K had also recruited 2 talented big men, Cherokee Parks and Eric Meek. Meanwhile, UNLV, gone. The Running Rebels lost all their stars and landed on NCAA probation. The dynasty Duke had slayed was crumbling. That meant something important. There was no Goliath left for Duke to play David against. Duke was Goliath. Coach K understood this from day one. He told his team something that would define their entire approach. We're not defending a national championship, we're pursuing one. That sounds like a coaching cliche, but it serves as this psychological framework. We need these shortcuts in our mind. Defending means protecting something. Pursuing means hunting. Coach K knew the moment his players started thinking about protecting what they had, they'd lose the edge that won it.
It was the best preparation that I've ever seen from a head coach. He wanted to just eliminate any ounce of being unsure of yourself.
Mike Bray, who was an assistant coach on that team, described the feeling perfectly. It was almost like traveling with a rock band, he said. We were the champions, we had all our stars back, and people either loved Laettner and Hurley or they hated him. No one was neutral when we played. And that was especially true because the school that produced the most media covering Duke was located 8 miles down the road in Chapel Hill. Coach K once said, no matter how much we win, we'll never be the most loved team in the area where we live and work. We're surrounded by people who want to see us lose. The Blue Devils won their first 17 games, 17 straight, against a difficult schedule. Their only close call was against Michigan in December, a team led by 5 freshmen who called themselves the Fab Five: Chris Webber, Jalen Rose, Jawan Howard, Jimmy King, and Ray Jackson.
Thought Christian Laettner was soft.
Overrated. Pretty boy.
I thought Christian Laettner was I really did. Until I actually got on the floor with him and realized that he had game.
Duke had to go into overtime to beat them 88-85. Remember that game. It'll matter later. Then came Chapel Hill. Late January, Duke 17-0, ranked number 1, 5 wins over ranked teams. North Carolina 16-3, ranked number 9. The Dean Dome was electric. And the emotions of the Carolina fans were best summed up by Jim Hevner, a longtime sports network operator who said before the game, they're already making plans for how to keep the celebration on Franklin Street under control if Carolina wins tonight. That's how big beating Duke has become. North Carolina got its wins, 75-73. 10 lead changes in the first half alone. Students and fans celebrated up and down Franklin Street deep into the night. But the loss itself wasn't the story. The story was happening to Bobby Hurley. Early in the second half, Hurley went down hard, and his foot felt the brunt of it. He kept playing, hobbling, gutting it out, because back then there were no x-ray machines in the building. When they finally got the x-ray, a clean break. Their point guard, the fearless engine that powered everything, was out. And the hardest part of their schedule was right in front of them. 4 of the next 5 games on the road at LSU, where Shaquille O'Neal was waiting. At Georgia Tech, at NC State, at Wake Forest. Now picture this. You're Coach K. Your point guard has just broken his foot. You've got road games against Shaq and 3 ACC teams. What do? For Coach K, there's an embarrassment of riches. Maybe again, this is why people got upset with him. What he did is a future-looking move. He moves Grant Hill to the point guard. You might remember Grant Hill from last episode and his gravity-defying, Wembanyama-esque reach beyond what would seem possible. He's the 6'8" small forward, the guy with the salt and pepper beard now that announces games and owns part of the Atlanta Hawks. And Coach K made that bold decision to slide him to point guard. He moves Antonio Lang into the starting lineup at forward and kept rolling. Remarkably, Duke lost only once during that stretch. Laettner outplayed Shaq for a second straight year. Hill ran the point like he'd been doing it his whole life. They won easily at Georgia Tech and NC State. The only loss came at Wake Forest, and it would turn out to be one of the most important games of the entire season, not because they lost, but because of how they lost. Wake Forest was led by a couple of my favorite college players growing up, Randolph Childress and a precocious forward named Rodney Rogers. They took Duke to the wire. The Deacons led 70-68, and with 2 seconds left, Duke had to go the length of the floor. They had a play for this, and it was called home run. The concept was simple. Grant Hill had the best arm on the team, so he would inbound. Laettner would come to the top of the key. Hill would throw him the ball, catch, turn, shoot. Simple. Except Wake Forest coach Dave Odom put his 6'8" forward, Trelawney Owens, directly in front of Hill. Laettner remembered Grant threw an awful pass. Grant Hill would laugh about this years later and fire back, well, it wouldn't have been awful if his slow ass had gotten to the ball. The ball sailed out of bounds, and Wake Forest won 72-68. Duke dropped to 21-2. And here's the thing, that failed play, it would save the entire season 2 months later. Because after it didn't work at Wake Forest, Duke practiced the home run over and over again. Laettner put it plainly, if it had worked at Wake, we probably wouldn't have practiced it as much. Hurley came back 2 games later. Duke beat 4th-ranked UCLA 75-65. On senior day, they avenged the Carolina loss, beating the Tar Heels 89-77. The victory clinched the ACC regular season title by 3 games. After that win, Laettner leaned on the scorer's table like it was a couch and told the Cameron crowd, now look, we still have 9 games to play. It's important that we know that you guys are back here partying and having a good time after every game. To play 9 more games, Duke would have to make it to both the ACC tournament championship game and the NCAA championship game. Nobody on that team expected anything less. Remember, they're the hunted, not the defenders. The ACC tournament was a breeze. Duke cruised past Maryland and Georgia Tech, and then met Carolina in the championship game for the 4th time in 5 years. A Laettner three-pointer at halftime gave Duke a 32-31 lead, and it was all downhill from there. The final score was 94-74. Payback is a beautiful thing. Duke entered the NCAA tournament as the number 1 seed in the East Regional. You could feel every team trying to flip the script, wanting them to become the hunted, the defenders. Every team in the bracket wanted to be the one that ended the dynasty before it could become one. The first 3 games were pretty routine, if you can call anything in March routine. But a second-round game against Iowa gave Duke a bit of a scare. The Hawkeyes pressed for 94 feet, and during a stretch in the second half, with Duke leading comfortably, the press suddenly started working. Duke had led 48-24 at halftime, and suddenly the lead was down to 8. Coach K calls a timeout and lets his players, Laettner and Hurley especially, yell and point fingers at each other for a moment. Then he turns to them and says, okay, do you guys want to cut the shit out and play, or do you want to go home? They decided to play. Duke wins 75-62. The Sweet 16 brought Seton Hall, coached by P.J. Carlissimo, an old friend of Coach K's from their days coaching at Army and Wagner. The Pirates fought hard. They had a guard, Terry DeHare, who scored 21 points. Even a freshman backup point guard named Danny Hurley. Where does he coach again? That's Bobby's little brother who's at UConn now. He played 18 minutes in this game. Duke finally pulled away, winning 81-69. And then came Kentucky, the East Regional Final, and nothing would be routine ever again. Rick Pitino had rebuilt Kentucky from the ashes of NCAA sanctions. The Wildcats were a number 2 seed, led by 6'8" Jamal Mashburn, 21 points and 8 rebounds a game. They played an up-tempo, they pressed, and they had 4 seniors known as the Unforgettables, players who had stayed through the bad times when nobody else wanted them. Pitino was even asked why they stayed, and he literally said nobody else wanted them. That was classic Pitino. The game was frenetic from the opening tip. Kentucky got exactly the pace they wanted. Mashburn was unstoppable. Man, I loved Jamal Mashburn. He was the prototype of a big, movement-oriented wing player. They're so common now, but to see a guy that size dribble, shoot, pass, it seemed like a reinvention of Magic Johnson at the time. Not quite as good, of course, but in college, you can imagine. He'd finished that game with 28 points and 10 rebounds. but Laettner also matched him shot for shot and finished with 31. Duke led 50-45 at halftime, easily the closest first half they'd played since the Carolina game. In the second half, Duke pushed the lead to 12 early. It looked like they might pull away, but Kentucky's press once again started wearing them out, especially Hurley. He finished with 12 points and 10 assists, but 8 turnovers. Unheard of for him. And then came the moment that still haunts bar arguments 30 years later.
Laettner calls for it. There's a double on Laettner. And Laettner kicked him. And they got him. There's a technical on Christian Laettner. Stepped right in his chest.
With 9 minutes left, Laettner drove to the basket. Timberlake, a 6'9" freshman who averaged 1.1 points per game, fouled him hard, knocking him off balance. Timberlake fell to the floor, and Laettner, regaining his footing, put his right foot squarely into Timberlake's chest. If you guys want more on this story, we actually interviewed him in one of the past podcasts, and it was incredible to hear his telling of it. Kentucky fans, of course, call it the Stomp, but Duke fans called it a step. The referees called it a technical foul, Laettner's fourth, but critically, they did not eject him. Timberlake jumped right up, unhurt, laughing and clapping in Laettner's face, as in, I got you. Years later, Laettner said, he had pushed me to the floor, and I made a note of it and made sure to be physical with him. Next thing I know, he went down in front of me. It was a dumb thing to do, but the emotion of the game sometimes gets the best of you. It was dumb. And it was also Laettner, the villain the world had wanted him to be, and the competitors' teammates needed him to be. Somehow, he embodied both, even in the same moment. Kentucky rallied, the turnovers mounted, and the game went into overtime, tied at 93. Mashburn fouled out 3 minutes in. The teams traded baskets. A Laettner jumper put Duke up 102-101 with less than a minute left. Then Sean Woods, one of the unforgettables, drove to the right side of the lane, rose up from 12 feet, and somehow got his shot over Laettner's outstretched hand and banked it off the glass and in. 103-102. Kentucky. 2.1 seconds left. CBS didn't go to commercial. Vern Lundquist was already composing the eulogy for Duke's repeat bid. Color commentator Len Elmore noted dryly, that fits. The shot went in, but it was a terrible shot. Duke called timeout, and this is where the story splits between what the camera saw and what happened inside the
I don't think this is meant to be. That's your first, reaction. You go sit and you're like, wow, we don't have enough time, and you start your mind's really
happened at the end.
It was really a back and forth game, and they went ahead 102-101. And so our guys called a timeout with 2.1 seconds, so we're down by a point. And when all the guys came in, I think the very first thing a leader has to show is show strength. And so I met them as they were coming to the bench. And
Racing and Coach K just kind of tried to get everyone in the moment as much as he could.
Coach K snapped him out of it pretty quick. I mean, he got in the huddle and basically said, we're going to win. And here's how we're going to do it.
I'm not sure I believed it, but because I'm their leader, I had to say it.
And he, asked Grant Hill, can you make a full court pass?
Yeah, I can make the pass. And then he asked Christian, can you make the shot?
Then he says, Coach, if Grant throws a good pass, I'll catch it.
Right before the ref handed Grant the ball, I said to myself, I don't have to rush. It's 2.1 seconds.
Bobby Hurley up the floor with Laettner. They throw it the left of the floor. Laettner catches, comes down, dribbles, shoots, scores! Christian Laettner has hit the bucket at the buzzer!
Coach K looked at his team. Some of them looked shell-shocked. And he said, we're going to win the damn game. Then he turned to Grant Hill. Can you make the pass? Hill said he could and turned to Laettner. Can you make the shot? Laettner just looked at him like the question itself was an insult. The play was home run, the same play that had failed at Wake Forest. The play they'd practiced over and over because of that failure. There was one massive difference. At Wake Forest, Dave Odom had put a defender on the inbounder. Rick Pitino, the man who wrote the book called Born to Coach, did not. Years later, Grant Hill said, I was surprised when no one came to guard me. I was wondering if they were going to call timeout to change the defense. Kentucky had no timeouts left. With no one guarding him, with both Kentucky defenders playing behind Laettner instead of in front of him, Hill stepped back and threw a 75-foot strike. Laettner jumped, caught it cleanly just inside the top of the key, and he had all the time in the world. Nothing but
Long
net.
pass, and Laettner's got it. Puts down a dribble, turns with a jumper. Good! And Duke wins it. 104 to 103. That is why they're number one.
104 to 103. Laettner spun around and ran towards Grant Hill. Thomas Hill burst into tears in the left wing. Coach K slammed the towel he'd been holding to the ground and went straight to Rick Pitino to embrace him. 10 for 10 from the field, 1 3-pointer, 10 for 10 from the line, 31 points. Anything short of perfection, and Duke loses. But even in that moment of chaos and euphoria, Coach K did something remarkable. He left the celebration and walked across the court to find the Kentucky radio broadcast crew. He knew that Kaywood Ledford, the legendary voice of the Wildcats for 39 years, had just called his final game. Ralph Hacker, Ledford's longtime broadcasting partner, remembered being stunned when he saw Coach K approaching. He pointed at his ears, and Hacker gave him the headset. And Coach K, seconds after the biggest shot in tournament history, leaned in and said to Ledford, "Carwood, I just want to congratulate you on a great career. You stood for everything that's good about broadcasting, about college basketball. I know Kentucky fans are disappointed, but I hope they're proud of their team tonight. That was one of the greatest college basketball games ever played." Hacker later said, "If I'd never met him before that night, I'd have loved him forever after what he did." That was as close to speechless as I'd ever seen him. To think to do that in that moment after the game was unbelievable. Ledford's call of the shot was the rarest thing in sports broadcasting, a homer announcer giving the other team its due. Now here's where most stories about the 1992 season would build to a triumphant crescendo. Duke flies to Minneapolis, wins the Final Four, cuts down the nets, roll credits. But life isn't that clean, and neither was this tournament run. In the other semifinal bracket, Michigan's Fab Five had knocked off Cincinnati. They'd be waiting in the championship game, brash, confident, and predicting 5 straight national titles. But Duke had to get through Indiana first, and Indiana meant Bob Knight.
What about Bobby Knight?
Well, Coach Knight was my college coach, and
This was at Army?
At Army,
Yeah.
a long time ago, and
He's nuts anyway. I mean, there's no getting around it. He's a great coach, maybe a genius, but he's wacky. You just can't dispute that.
well, I don't think he's nuts. I think he's brilliant, and but I think at some times people can portray us all being nuts.
Now, if you've been listening to this podcast, you know that Knight is a thread running through the entire Duke story. Knight coached at Army. A young Mike Krzyzewski played for him. When Krzyzewski got out of the Army, his first coaching job was as Knight's graduate assistant at Indiana. It was Knight who helped him get the Army head coaching job at 29. In 1986, when Duke first made the Final Four, Knight walked around Dallas wearing a Go Duke button. But that was before Duke started winning championships, and before Sports Illustrated ran a feature on Coach K during the Final Four week. The article was titled Blue Angel, and the thesis was simple. The student had surpassed the teacher. I can't imagine how angry that made Knight. I'm sure he was furious. And he actually sends Coach K an angry letter that week, telling him that he's ungrateful and just couldn't believe how he was treating Knight. Coach K understood the letter for what it was, part genuine hurt and part an attempt to distract him before the biggest game of the season. He didn't let it work, but what happened after the game was different. Indiana was one of Knight's best teams since the 1987 championship. Calbert Chaney, Damon Bailey, Alan Henderson, Chris Reynolds. This squad had crushed UCLA by 25 in the regional final. They came in at 25-6, and they would not be intimidated. And for once in this game, Christian Laettner was human. The guy who couldn't miss in Philadelphia couldn't make a shot in Minneapolis. 1 for 6 in the first half. No rebounds until midway through the period. His first 2 free throws, the first misses after 20 straight makes. They rattled in and out. The numbers from Kentucky had finally caught up to him. Laettner said years later, "You certainly can't expect to keep shooting the way I had in the Kentucky game, especially against a really good defense like Indiana. They doubled me a lot, and that certainly affected me." But Bobby Hurley was there to keep Duke alive. He poured in 16 first-half points, including 4 3-pointers. Every time it looked like Indiana might blow the game open, Hurley answered. Indiana led 39-27 with 2 minutes left in the half. A Hurley 3 and a couple of Grant Hill buckets cut it to 42-37 at the break. Then, early in the second half, Knight got hit with a technical foul by referee Ted Valentine. Oh, TV Ted. Hurley made both free throws. Hill scored on the next possession. Duke led 44-43, and they never looked back.
The lead is 9. Duke by 9.
And again, Christian Laettner has been awful quiet.
Hurley. Oh, all of those threes have been so pure, just ripping the net.
That's his 24th point.
A 31-6 run stretching from the end of the first half into the second gave Duke a 58-45 lead. They cruised until the final minute, when Indiana guard Todd Leary, a guy averaging 3.6 points per game, came off the bench and hit 3 3-pointers in less than 60 seconds. Duke managed to hold on 81-78. But the real story happened in the handshake line. Coaches filed past each other, and Bob Knight made a point of not slowing down when he reached Coach K. This is sometimes known as a blow-by handshake, a deliberate signal that you want nothing to do with the other person. Knight hugged Colonel Tom Rogers, Duke's director of basketball operations, who had been Knight's military liaison at Army, just to make the point sharper. And then, behind the curtain in the hallway that the NCAA had set up so teams could walk between the locker rooms and the interview room uninterrupted, it got worse. Indiana players Henderson and Chaney stopped to shake hands with Laettner and Hurley and wish them luck. Knight did the same with the players, and then Coach K walked up, hand extended. Nothing. Knight acted as if he hadn't seen him and walked right past. Mickey Krzyzewski, Coach K's wife, knew immediately something was wrong. She found a reporter in the hallway and grabbed his arm and said, "You have to go see Mike in the coach's room." The staff sat in dead silence. They had just won a Final Four game, but it felt like a funeral. Coach K told the story and then said what he needed to say, shook it off, turned his attention to Monday night, because there was still one game left and the Fab Five were waiting.
Is hating on Duke falling out of style is funny. I'm interviewing Grant Hill for my podcast coming up. It was easy to hate Duke that much more with him, even though I really liked him. Popcorn at the movies, the hot dog barbecue on the 4th of July, presents under the tree at Christmas.
That's another one,
and hating Duke, you know?
This Michigan team. I might have to get the socks out. I did a podcast episode years ago about socks, and I still have the pair of Nike socks that they wore. And this team was absolutely electric. They were the darling of this tournament. 5 freshman starters: Weber, Rose, Howard, King, Jackson. They were at this year's Final Four and still making headlines. They got their own alternate broadcast even. They had their baggy socks, their baggy shorts, and just a swagger that modernized college basketball. Chris Webber said before the game, "Our strength is that we don't respect anyone." That's stark words. This was from the press conference before the game and a bunch of documentaries, including a wonderful Fab Five documentary that you can find on ESPN. Duke players, of course, all heard that. Grant Hill said, "We knew they were good, and we certainly respected them, but we were too close to let someone beat us." But Duke was banged up. Grant Hill had been playing on a bad ankle for a month, injured when Cherokee Parks accidentally came down on it in practice. Brian Davis had hurt his ankle against Indiana and was questionable before the game, and Laettner was still struggling from the floor. Michigan led 31-30 at halftime, and Coach K remembered standing in the hallway listening to the Wolverines whoop and holler as they ran to their locker room, clearly convinced they were going to win. Inside the Duke locker room, it was quiet for about 10 seconds, and then Bobby Hurley stood up, walked over to Christian Laettner, and got right in his face. Multiple players have recounted Hurley saying, "What the hell is wrong with you, Christian?" Laettner knew he needed a kick in the rear end, and he's often said that he'd never forget that Bobby Hurley stood over him, said, "We need you to win this game."
Can't remember exactly what I said, but it was full Jersey City, and he responded. You know, he accepted the criticism from people that normally wouldn't go at him like that, and I don't know if that helped, but he had a heck of a second half.
Whether it was the Hurley speech or his own internal fortitude, the things that had been bothering or wrong with Laettner disappeared when the second half started. 5 minutes in, he cut behind Grant Hill and buried a 3, his first of the weekend, and gave Duke a 36-35 lead. Michigan hung in for a few more minutes, But with Duke up 48-45, Laettner drove at Chris Webber, hit a layup, made it 50-45, and it was basically over there. Duke scored on 12 of their last 13 possessions. They outscored Michigan 41-20 in the second half, 25-6 over the final 7 minutes. The final score was an astonishing 71-51, a 20-point championship game blowout against the most hyped freshman class in history.
The game is over. The Duke of Destiny has won it. For the first time in 2 decades, college basketball has a repeat champion.
Bobby Hurley, despite shooting 3 for 12, was voted the most outstanding player. Laettner shot 4 for 5 in the second half with 0 turnovers, and Grant Hill finished with 18 points and 10 rebounds. Thomas Hill was the unsung hero of both championship runs and had 16 and 7 in this game. And after the game, every Duke player put the same t-shirt on, and it read, "You can talk the game, but can you play the game?" If that's not a message to the Fab Five, I don't know what is. Think about how good this team was. Bobby Hurley missed almost a month with a broken foot. Grant Hill played hurt for the final month of the season, and they ended up with 2 losses, both by 2 points, in 36 games, and they won the national championship by 20. As Hurley put it, we were pretty good. Christian Laettner finished his Duke career with 4 consecutive Final Four appearances, 2 national titles. His 407 points and 23 NCAA tournament games are records that are probably never going to be reached. He played a perfect game to beat Kentucky, the shot that will be replayed until they stop playing the tournament. Bobby Hurley left Duke as one of the greatest point guards in college basketball history. Fearless, emotional, the kind of player who would stand up in a championship game locker room and tell the best player in the country to get his act together, because that's what the team needed. Grant Hill would become an NBA All-Star, but at Duke, he was the ultimate teammate, the guy who moved a point guard when Hurley went down, who threw the most famous inbound pass in history. He did whatever was asked of him without complaint. And Coach K, after the Kentucky game, someone asked him about winning back-to-back titles, about what it meant, and the possibility of a third, and he paused for a moment and said, "I wonder where the third one might go." He was already imagining the wall in Cameron, already picturing more banners. In the 32 years since Duke went back-to-back, only 2 other teams have managed that feat, Florida in 2006 and 2007, and Connecticut in 23 and 24. That's how hard it is. That's how rare it is, and that's how good the 91-92 Blue Devils were. The second banner in Cameron Indoor was hung right next to the first one, Banner 1 and Banner 2, side by side, the beginning of a dynasty that would reshape college basketball for decades. The 1991-92 Duke Blue Devils teach us something different than the 91 team did. Banner 1 was about redemption, turning humiliation into glory. But Banner 2 was about something harder. It's about staying on top when the world wants to pull you down, about being the villain and thriving in it, about losing your point guard and finding the way forward, about playing the greatest college basketball game ever played, and then having to win 2 more games after it. It was about a coach who honored an opposing broadcaster seconds after the biggest win of his career, and who absorbed the devastating personal slight from his mentor in the same week. And he still coached his team to a national championship. And it was about a 6'10" kid from upstate New York who played a perfect game when perfection was the only option. Thank you for joining us on Iconic Seasons. I'm Aaron Meyer. We'll be back soon with another story of a team that changed everything. Until next time, keep your dribble low and your eyes up.